Hey, Tim here. Today we have something special. This video is going to be the data model masterclass, and I couldn't think of anyone better to join me other than Kirk Munroe himself. Kirk, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Are you ready to blow our minds with the data model?
Yes, this is like 3 years culmination of explaining this, and I think I've got it down right.
Do you want to do the honors, Kirk?
Absolutely. Let's get stuck in.
Okay, so the plan for this video is to make sure that by the end of the video, you know everything you need to know to confidently use the data model. You'll find timestamps below in the description, but also across this entire timeline. So if there's a bit that you know a lot about, you can jump ahead. But it's a great way of revisiting sections if you need to. I think that will be necessary for this one. So make sure you pay attention to the timestamps. The other thing I'm going to ask you to do is if you find this video useful, please subscribe, then share it with your colleagues, your friend, and the community at large. We're really trying to build a useful resource for the whole community. So we really value your feedback. And if you love it, sharing is a great way to let us know that you love it. All right, let's do this. Okay, so Kirk, we're here inside of Tableau. And I think the first thing we have to do is explain what the data model is by maybe showing people like where it happens. Where does the data modeling happen, right? So to do this, I'm going to use everyone's favorite data set, not Superstore, Bookshop data. I'll put a link in the description so you can download this from the Tableau website. Go ahead and grab it yourself. When you get the file from Tableau, it comes in sort of two variants. There's the main Bookshop data source file, which is an Excel file. That's what I'm going to select here. Select open, and we'll immediately go into the connection window. And Kirk, I think it's fair to say that this is where the magic starts, right? Is there anything I should know that's really cool about this place before we get started?
What's cool about this place, I think, is it's the same as working on a sheet, and that Tableau makes it very intuitive. So you can drag and drop, but you can also double click your way through this. And if the field names match different tables, it'll double click build out the data model for you, as long as the field names that you're going to relate on have to be exactly the same for that to work. But you can even double click your way through it if you want.
Oh yeah, that worked. So what I did there is I double clicked book and I double clicked edition. The first time I double clicked, I was clicking somewhere off screen, so it didn't work. I was like, why is this not working, Kirk? You're lying to me. But no, double click book, double click edition, and it immediately creates a connection between the two. So let's explain what this connection is. It's saying it's called a relationship with related fields. Is this the data model? Is this what people should know as the data model?
Yeah, you now have a data model, and it would be, we would call this a logical data model. And the reason for that is because you can build this data model without understanding SQL at all. Basically, be the way to think about it.
Okay. And so right now I have a connection between my book information. So if we click on books, we'll see that it shows us the list of books here. Book ID, title, author ID. We kind of get it in two ways. We get the metadata and we get the tabular sort of preview. It's showing 58 rows. I think that's all the data there is. Typically, Tableau shows like 10,000
100,
rows.
I think.
Yeah, 100.
Oh, is it 1,000?
I don't know. Like, it's one of those things where I never know which it is, because sometimes it is 10,000 and sometimes it's 1,000, and I can never know, like, why is it changing? But anyway, we see the preview. This is great. I click on edition. It shows me the different pieces of information. So the question I've never understood is, why can't I see what they're doing together here?
Because they aren't doing anything together here until you on a sheet tell them to do something together.
Right.
So they're literally doing nothing together here. That is two independent database tables, or physical tables effectively, that all you've told them is what's common between those tables.
I see. So it's a bit like I've got my ingredients for a recipe, but I have not started cooking yet. I've not made anything, so they are just distinct items on my kitchen table. Perfect. Okay, so this is interesting. So the books at data is actually quite useful. If you're not familiar with Tableau, there's this sort of very, very subtle icon that appears. Let me just draw where it's going to be. It's going to be in this sort of red area. Whenever I hover over a table, it's going to show you this option. So you can see here, as I hover over each of these, I see this little icon. If I go over to, let's say, book, and I click on it, I get a little preview of the data set. So this is a a modal window that gives you a bit of insight into the actual data set. And so if we just look at this data very briefly, we've got checkouts, we get a book ID, the month, and the number of checkouts. I think this is maybe related to library information, and we'll come back to that in a second. We've also got the awards that have been won. We get the award name, the title. I think this is belonging to the book title specifically, and then the year that was won as a let's call this like a double. I keep thinking in Alteryx term doubles and integers, but numerical field, if that makes sense. You can tell I spent too much time in Alteryx. And then you've got things like sales. We seem to have 4 quarters of sales spread out here. So essentially each file is just going to be a quarter of sales. But because these are all in the same structure, I think I can start to sort of form an assessment of what I'm going to do to build this data model a little bit. So let me just look at these to just confirm they're the same columns. They are. So we start to understand sort of what our data looks like. And I think, Kirk, it's fair to say that it's probably a good thing to just scan your data first before you plan how you're going to build your data model. Is that like a fair thing to do, or should you just start with the analysis and then come back and do it? Like, people have sort of different philosophies.
Yeah, no, I think it's worth looking first. I say to people all the time, you don't need to understand SQL to be good at Tableau, but you need to understand your data really well to be a good analyst. So whether it's Tableau or not, so what jumps off the page here pretty quickly is it's intuitive to go, well, books must go to sales, but I'm sure you'll get to this, but it's actually editions that sell, not books that sell. So you kind of need to know that going in. Again, you could figure it out pretty quickly here. The double clicking will actually inform you, because if you double click and it can't make the connection, it'll throw it in as a base table. But like that, there are ratings related to it. But if it weren't,
ratings, so that's pretty good.
It would just hang it as a base table because it wouldn't know what to do with it. And then you could go, I better explore this.
All right, so let me do
even when you double click, it's good to check to make sure Tableau didn't get it wrong.
So what I'm going to do quickly, just to test your theory, is if I click on this drop down and I select remove, that removes the model. So now what I know I need to do is connect to a publisher data set, and the publisher, if we have a look at it, is only going to connect to our books via a common field that they both have with the edition table. So if I just look at this, you'll see here, the publisher ID is going to be the common field between the edition table and this table, and the edition will bring the books with it. So if I double click on publisher, you're right, it drops it in as a base table and actually gives us a little icon. So these are sort of all bits of information. Are you able to maybe just explain what's going on here? What is it trying to tell me right out of the gate?
Yeah, so effectively what it tells you is, we'll get back to what base tables are good for, but what it's basically telling you is, I have to put this thing as a base table, at least right now, because I have Tableau saying, because I have no idea to know how to relate this publisher to book. I don't know. I can't do it. So I have to throw it here, right? So therefore what it's assuming here, which in this case isn't a great assumption, but that because they can't relate it, that you must have other things that relate those together, and you're going to tell it how to relate those things together.
I see. So it's just giving me a warning, but we know this was wrong. We kind of sort of tested, and you get this little alert as well. I think this alert, when you click on it, it tells you, hey, you have 2 unrelated tables, right? And there's a little option, but maybe let's come back to this setting a little later, because I think it makes sense a little later on. But for now, let's stop going off track. Let me stop sort of sapping you of all your knowledge, and let's build out this model in earnest. And I'm going to try and do this as a data analyst would. I know a little bit about this data set. I know a little bit about how this model should look like. I've also got it off screen, but nonetheless, we're going to build it out. I'm going to show you all the different things as we go along. So the thing I did last time is I double-clicked edition, and it created this relationship for us. When you hover over this, you see the relationship. So book and edition, book ID equals book ID. I don't need to change that, but if I wanted to, all I'd need to do is just come down here on the bottom left, and I'd be able to sort of change that myself. I'll come back to the options in a second, because I think it's important just to build this out. Then we can sort of step into it a little bit more. The next thing was double clicking publisher. Previously, this didn't work because we didn't have the edition table, but you can see that there we have it. I keep clicking on it, but it actually works on hover. I need to get that muscle memory out of me. I just double click everything in Tableau.
The only thing I was going to say is, of course, you can connect on multiple fields if you have to connect on two.
Yes.
Or do a join, and they don't have to equal. You'll notice you have an operator there that, if you were doing dates, you could say less than date and effectively pass a filter in the relationship too. So
here are all the operators, but these operators are specifically because of the dimensions I'm using. If I was doing relationships in a slightly different way, the operator would change to match the data type. I think that's like a fair assumption to make. And then you've also got the ability to add more fields. So I could relate on multiple, let's say, levels of granularity within two different tables. So maybe I need both a publisher ID and, for whatever reason, another contextual piece of information. Is there a suggestion on how many make sense? Like, when does it get ridiculous? Like, because I know I can just keep adding this.
Well, sorry, it's always an and condition. So every time you add one, it's less likely to match. So it's really only when you have things like a compound, like two fields, and you don't want to do a compound field calculation. Like, say you had to match on first name and last name or something. Right. It's a super easy one. You have to match on, both of them have to be true to match, right? So.
Okay, perfect. Okay. Yeah. So that's pretty good. Let's keep pushing through. So we've got our books edition publishers. I think it's time that we show people how we can bring our sales data in. And there's a couple of ways to do this. I do this probably the most unrealistic way, which is because if I just double click this and I click sales, you'll see that it does make the correct relationship between the edition and the sales, and that's absolutely fine. But then you're probably wondering, well, how do I bring the other two? I always like to anchor on the initial table in a union, and that's what we're about to do here. So now that I've got those two there, I can hold shift and select these three, and then I can drag them. And if I just put them on top, you'll see that Tableau has this orange sort of alert to say, hey, I'm going to union this. And by the way, I'm going to union them underneath sales Q1. And as soon as I drop that in, it thinks about it, and then it changes that little icon to sales Q1. So this has some new terminology here. I can see it saying double click this logical table to see its physical table. Can you explain what a physical and logical table is? Because I've never understood why they use these terms, if that makes sense.
Yeah, if I could quickly, there's two other ways to do that union. You could have highlighted them all and just drag them all on. Like you could have highlighted all four, drag them on, it would have automatically done a union.
Right. So I really like, so if I do this and I just drop them there, does it also figure out the relationship? It does. Wow. Yeah. So that's amazing. Yeah. That's cool. That's really cool.
And the third way, which I almost always do, is I right click on it and edit union. Well, drag one of them on, or you could have done what you just did. It doesn't matter. And then
do that,
you can go straight to edit union. If you convert to union first, and then edit union. And then I got a wild card here all the time. And I would go like star sales star, and then if another quarter sales came in, you would have to touch your data model. It would just keep adding to your union or whatever. Usually
I never do this. I never do this. Why do I never do this? I think it's a bit scary, if I'm honest. I'm not going to lie. I don't like doing things in places where I can't see. So maybe because I'm like a visual person. Maybe. So you're suggesting I could do this. So star sales.
I think it's probably case sensitive. I don't know.
Capital sales, and then
what was star again? Just go star, and then assuming that it's gonna and then you have to know that when people drop it, they always start it with sales.
It needs to have that sort of match. So if I click apply and click OK,
it's a very old
I think that's
wild
worked.
Card match.
Q1, that's kind of worked. So let me just make this like 10,000 rows. Let's test this properly. I don't know how many cells were in our first one. Probably, there you go. Cells Q2, that's worked. So
there's 56,000 total.
Okay. It says so right here. I'm being really slow. So it says so right there.
350.
And I'm able to see that. And then, of course, this little drop down is just another way to navigate this top area, right? So this little lets me look at the logical tables and the relationship. Sales Q1 is not a logical table. It's a physical table. So we'll go on that. But you hadn't explained what a physical table is.
Okay, sorry. Back to the actual question. So I should clarify this a little bit. I find Tableau confuses this a little bit because they call them logical tables and physical tables.
Right.
Where the term actually comes from in the data modeling world is there's logical models and there's physical models. And what's really neat about traditionally what a logical model would be exactly what you're looking at, where you would just say some business analyst or data analyst who's not a data engineer could just draw tables out and then say, this is how they relate. And then you would hand those to a data engineer, and the data engineer would write a whole bunch of SQL and cast fields and do all that sort of stuff, create joins, right? What's neat about relationships is that if the logical table comes to life, you don't need the data engineer. Tableau will dynamically create what it needs to create at runtime. Now, but Tableau brought it down a level, and they call them logical tables and physical tables. Like a table's a physical table, but just think about it. It means it's a table in a logical model, basically. Right. So, if you open this up, so literally click on it and open. Right, you could and now you can create joins in here at the physical layer, kind of like what a data engineer would do, or what Tableau used to force you to do before 2020.2, which is create joins at the physical layer. In this case, Tableau always considers a union physical layer because there's no such thing as a logical union. It doesn't make sense. And then for people who don't know, that difference between a union and a join is a join adds columns to an existing table, and a union adds rows to a table. So a good union shouldn't add columns. Really, it's just adding more rows under the same columns. But but every union's physical because it wouldn't make sense to do something with them at runtime. It makes sense to always bring all those rows in. Is effectively the reason why.
Okay, good. So there's a lot of, like, say, etymology, to borrow a phrase from linguistics, right? Where
a lot.
All of these different, let's say, bits of heritage from the actual data modeling world are being sort of co-opted into this Tableau world to kind of make sense of how we work with our data. And I think this is a good way to think about it, because actually we have one more challenge with our book data, which is that in it, we need to go and add some information about books. And so in the data model that Tableau sort of showcase, they talk about putting the information about the book as a join inside of the book logical table. So let's double click inside of the book logical table, and then we'll see the physical book table. And what we need to do in here is do a join to bring in the information. And this is also a little bit more of a nuanced join, so I'll try and do it and explain it as I go along. So if I bring in my information table and I drop it in, you'll see what I would call the traditional join interface, right, for Tableau, where we have the option between 4 different types of join. And on the left-hand side, I am going to use my book ID. But on the right, I have a slight problem because if I actually preview this data, let's just close this quickly. I can do that whilst it's open. We see that the book ID is actually in 2 parts. We have book ID 1 and book ID 2, and we need to bring them together. And typically, this is kind of annoying because I think way back when you would have had to do some SQL to bring these 2 together, then come in here and set it up. But actually, you can just go in here inside of the calculation and say, look, book ID equals, and then at the very bottom in the tiniest of tiniest text, I don't know why it's so small. It should be bigger, right?
Yeah.
Create a join calculation. So in here, I can do book ID 1 plus book ID 2 and hit apply. And then Tableau will say, okay, I get what you're trying to do. And you'll notice the window changed here. So in my preview, you can see it started to bring the dates together. If I hit OK, you can see that it's actually doing that calculation in that little drop down. You can't see it in here. You just get this little option again to say edit join calculation. Then it comes back up. But that's now working. And then the critical thing here is choosing your join. So I guess here I have to be careful about my join because at this point I'm being specific about the join. So if I want to keep all my books, even if they don't have information, I need to use a left join so we don't lose any book information from this particular outcome. Is that a fair summary of that?
Yes, that's a fair summary. The only thing I would add to this is a couple things to add. Now, this book is you're at the physical table layer because now your
Yes.
book at the logical table now has two tables that are joined together, and into Tableau they're going to look like one table. Hence, one logical table, even though there's two physical tables inside that table. The last thing I would add is I would only do well, there's always exceptions. Counting it, there would always be exceptions. I would only do this join if there were the same number of rows in both tables.
Oh, interesting. Why is that?
Because otherwise, the great reason you would use relationships is because you might not know what questions you want to ask and you don't want to explode your data. So when you do this join, you're joining the data before you ask any question in Tableau. But since you're not exploding the data model or creating any kind of problems with like levels of detail because you're messing up they're at the same level. Basically, there's one row in every there's one row in info for every book and vice versa. Then why make Tableau join those two tables together at runtime? You might as well pre-join it ahead of time. Right. So that's the only time I would do one of these join.
I see. And so for this diagram, they've basically just done it for like demo purposes, but in real terms, we would do this outside. Now, can you do? No,
I might join this, like I said in this case, sorry, because there are the same number of rows. I think if you look, there's 58 rows in both.
58 rows in. Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So you might as well join them to prevent Tableau from having to join them all the time at runtime that you ask for the question.
Yeah, there's 58 rows, 6 fields, and then Books has the same information there. 58 rows, 3 fields. Perfect. Okay. So now that we've built this, I've always wondered, can I rename this logical table, if that makes sense? So now that it's because it's book and info. So when I go back here, can I rename them?
Yeah, now you can rename it here, and you also see that it's got an indicator showing you.
Oh yes. It's got a
you
little
can rename
join indicator, and I could rename it here. So I can call this book and info. In there, I wish it had like. I guess it does have an indicator, and it's trying to avoid redundancy because it's showing you the join icon, it's showing you the union icon. So is it fair to say that anytime you see an icon before the name of the logical table, there are physical tables being brought together inside of that logical square, right?
Perfect way to describe it.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, good. So we've got our book info.
The other quick thing on this that I always try to do, is rename the data source the same thing too. It gives it a terrible name based on whatever field you drop on first, which is terrible.
Book plus.
Yeah.
So we'll call this Bookshop data model. Right. And this is actually super important because if you go ahead and you skip right past this and you publish that up, when you look at your metadata, it's going to have tons of things that just say book plus shop, book plus.
Yes.
Because you've always dragged in book as your first one, when in actual fact, the models are doing different things, right? So that's a good catch. So yeah, get used to naming your models. You'll find, Kirk, that I don't name anything. I go through the whole project, then I start renaming only the things that present themselves to users.
I often forget. I just thought it was a good point to bring it up when you were talking about renaming.
It's a good one. Yeah. Good. All right. So I think we're nearly there. Let me see if we can do this. So I've got my books, I've got my editions, my publishers and sales. Author information is pretty important. So let me just sort of take your tip here and double click it, and I'll see the author ID map. So that works really nicely. The other bits of information I need to bring on are the awards. Again, it's just sort of mapping this out. The other thing are checkouts. I can't remember what checkouts are. So checkout month, number of checkouts. Okay, so this is like, I think this is like a library data set, really. That's why it has checkouts. So let's just double click that and then we'll get that relationship. And each time it's picking the right thing. I think this data set's set up quite smart because it's finding the right IDs. If I had different IDs that I could use this relationship with, what I would be able to do is then just go click on these and change them manually. So I urge people to check those, even though we're clicking through this very quickly. Sometimes it's just worth checking these over and making sure it's doing what you expect them to do. Okay. and then ratings. And I think series is the last one. And I think we're pretty much there. I think that is everything that should be in that model. Okay, so a pretty complicated, actually simple model. Books is our booking information is our base table. Then we've got a series of other information. Now, when I hover over these and I click on them, we get a little bit of contextual information. The next thing I wanted to do is just ask a little bit more about the specific settings. So if I just bring this up here and I move this up, and let me just click on this sort of line, you'll see that Tableau does two things. When you click on the line, it highlights the related, the tables, the logical tables that are linked with this connection. So you can see that that's highlighted book info and checkout. If I do that again, you'll see it grays them out. But one thing I wanted to ask is a little bit more about these performance options. How often do you change these? Because truthfully speaking, I never touch these.
I touch these at a rate approaching 0 for sure. It's closer to 0% of the models than 1% of the models.
Right.
The reason for this is Tableau has the heuristics, if I guess it's the right term to use, is if I pull a dimension from, say, let's take your example, and I pull a dimension from checkouts and I pull a dimension from books, and that's all I pull from it, Tableau is going to give me an inner join between those. It's basically saying you must only want things that have the two dimensions. And then what Tableau does really smart is if you pull a measure from either one of those tables. So in the way this looks now, imagine you pulled a measure in from checkouts.
Yeah.
Tableau's going to inner join on the dimension, and then it'll give you all the checkouts. Say you pull in some of checkouts or whatever, it'll give them to you for every book. And if a book had no checkouts, it'll no fill it in, basically.
Okay,
so it effectively does an outer join to the table that you bring the measure in from. If you were to bring one in from, so that's a right join, effectively, if you look at it that way. Do you know what I mean? Like, then
Makes
if
sense.
But if you brought a measure in from book and info, like say count a book and info, it would also it would also do an outer join to that table.
I see.
I point this out because it's really slick when you get good with understanding the heuristics. With a logical model, you can answer any question you want, which is really frustrating with the other ones. I don't know if you've had them before where you want to get Tableau to give you the null answer to something and it won't because it doesn't have the data to do it, right? Yeah. So if you start playing with these performance things, you're overriding Tableau's heuristics and it won't look for them, right? So I find I start getting answers I don't want to get. Do you know what I mean? So in a very, very big model, where you had a very, very big, like your booking in, and you had one of those tables was a very big table of sales where you had every sales transaction. You might start playing with this or whatever, but my default is don't touch them. Like don't try to be over smart, only if you run into performance issues, because you're compromising some of the questions you can ask as soon as you start playing with it.
Yeah. And so really, unless you're a power user, don't fiddle with this, because there might be instances where, for example, you do know a lot about your data and the way it's set up, and therefore you maybe do want to drive this relationship. For example, the most obvious one that comes up is like 1-to-1, where basically you're telling Tableau that when you write your query, if you find one book ID over here, you're only going to find one match over there, basically. So that's basically how that is working. But,
so this was my example of I would always join this one anyway.
Yeah,
like
correct,
I would do an inner join between these two tables. Anyway.
Correct. Exactly. So that closes the loop on that one of probably why you'll never want to do this. And any other time you have one to many or many to one, you don't want to be messing with this, because I guess the suggestion is Tableau can figure that out as you build stuff, right? As you start to bring dimensions into the view.
Right. And by setting it, you're telling Tableau something that might not actually be in your data model. So then it's not answering the questions you expect it to answer. The whole point is, if you want it to be highly performant, it's a much longer conversation about what your data is structured like. Do you know what I mean? But mostly I find it, these are quicker anyway, usually, relationships, if they're built right. like so. We'll talk more about that.
Amazing. All right, let me revert to default. Let's step out of here. Let's stop messing with the power options. Let's bring this back down. Okay, so this is our full data model. One last question. I see this question around layout so often, right? Where like I think people have this desire to arrange this in a star to match sort of, you know, I guess it's like the star schema diagrams that you see where you have books as your main thing, but then you have different things. And I think we had a good, interesting discussion at conference about, well, two aspects of this. Number one, this is the same as that. It's just laid out from left to right. And then a second point, which I'll let you come back to as well, is this layout is just a visual representation that we see. But in actual fact, different layouts could achieve the same outcome. Is that like a fair way of saying it? Like, is that a fair way of describing that?
Yes. Yes. That's a fair way. The thing I don't, we talk about this a lot, I don't love about it is Tableau, by its very nature, right, assumes that everyone's an expert almost. Or at a minimum, it assumes it's not their job to tell you how to do something. Right? So when we look at my version of this model, there are better ways to build this model that I wish it would drive you into. Because what I mean by that is it won't stop you from doing one. But if you want to think about this, if you wanted to know in this model which publishers had checkouts, right? It's not a great example because checkouts don't have publishers, but let's say they did, right? You would need a field from edition and book and info on the view in order for Tableau to create the join, because it needs to know how to. So they have to actually be in the view for Tableau to be able to do it. So it might figure it out on its own. Sometimes it'll figure it out on its own, but there is kind of a better way to build these. And it's interesting, if you have multiple fact tables, then you should build kind of a star schema, except that your middle of your star in a normal looking model are all base tables in Tableau. So it looks very different than a star, but it is effectively a star. If people don't know what a star schema is, it's basically tables that have the majority of your measures in the middle, and then you hang all the dimension tables off them, right? So they would call them fact and dim tables, right? Again, Tableau doesn't use that term. They use base table, and they use shared dimension tables. So
amazing. So I have a button here, Kirk, and I really want to click it to see if this summarizes our point. I think I know what it's going to do. So if I go to this option, what I did is I clicked on this down arrow and I have this option, swap with base table book info. Is this just telling Tableau that, hey, instead of book info being our base table, make checkouts our base table? And as a result, checkouts will move over here. But because everything else is linked via books, book will become the second one, and then all of these will become in the third column, and then this one will become the fourth column. Is that how you think it's going to arrange it? I'm trying to guess if I understand this behavior.
It should do it that way. Let's see if it does.
Let's try it. There we go.
It does.
Amazing. So that is sort of just super interesting, because functionally this is still the same logical, same data model. It's just arranged differently, right?
Right. It just looks differently. You might find this easier to understand as an example, but it doesn't fundamentally change anything that, it's great. That would not change. If you had a whole dashboard built out on this thing, nothing would change. If you took a join and changed which went where, it might blow away every sheet in your dashboard.
True. That does definitely happen. And you'd also lose your formatting and all the metadata to go with it. So. Okay, cool. So that to me is really profound, because for a long time I thought that the way you did this really did matter. So like, I think there was a conversation on LinkedIn where we talked about, hey, so like, if it doesn't matter, how should you do it? And I think we just settled on do it the way that makes sense for the way you're going to do your analysis, right? And I think that's essentially what we've sort of just touched on.
Well, I would say if you only have one fact table, which we'll get to in my section, then that's true. Right. Here you have two fact tables. If you have more than one fact table, the fact table, so in other words, the table that's got your measures in it, your main measures, should be a base table. And it's a good practice. Before multi-fact relationships in 2024.2, I would have built it this way because I think, it's about books. So I would have put that in. Now I wouldn't. I would put sales and checkouts as base tables because it lets me do something it never let me do before.
I see.
But again, it didn't need to be that way. Like you said, the way you swapped it, same answers, doesn't matter. But it does matter if you want to bring information in from two fact tables that look nothing alike. So imagine you were working with a system like Salesforce. It could be an ERP where you have sales data and you have service data, and they have nothing. Let's keep it simple. They have nothing to do with each other, but they share a whole bunch of dimensions like customer and product, and then you need to put those in your base tables, and then you can answer all kinds of questions against both of them together, like as ratios and stuff.
I see. Interesting. Yeah. Okay. I want to try one last thing, very quick one. Then we're going to go. I'm going to see what happens if I change my sales Q1 union to become the base table. If this does what I think it's going to do, it's going to flip it the other way around. So sales will go over to the left, and will publisher become a base table, or will it come off edition in our third column? This is what I'm trying to guess. So my hunch is publisher and edition will stay there. Sales will go over here, and books will go into the fourth column. Is that accurate? Hold on, let me think about this for a second. No, actually, books will go into 1, 2, 3. All of these edition, everything in this column apart from edition would go into column 4. Book would go into column 3, edition column 2, sales column 1, but publisher would be in column 3. Okay,
I'm going to go with 3.
So let's try this. Oh. There we go. Let's call this, I don't know what, this sounds like a game show, right? This is going to be a great quiz.
Exactly. What's behind door 3? I know.
Whatever floats our boat. Okay, that's enough of this stuff. Let's put it back to how it should work. So let's put this back.
No, we just talked about that they're equally valid, those two.
They're equally valid. Sorry, they're the same thing. And here I am saying, let's put it back to how it should be. Okay, so I think this is good. So far, we've lived entirely in this connection window. Before I go to just a sheet, just to show what this looks like inside of the sheet where we build our charts, is there anything else sort of worth calling out at this point? I think we've looked at the logical and physical. We've looked at these connections. I like this little highlighting, actually. I didn't realize this until very recently. I don't know if this is new, but I like that when you hover over a connection, it highlights the path, which is quite useful, and it shows you the critical links. That's actually quite nice.
Right. So it's effectively showing you publisher can get to book information. It just has to go through the edition table to get there.
Right, exactly. And so when you click on the line, it shows you the 2 immediate logical items, and then anything else linked to it is just white, but it's not out of focus. And as soon as you click out, everything comes out of focus. So these lines.
So if you highlight book and info, it'll highlight everything, I believe.
If I select it will highlight everything. Yes.
It's odd because it's selecting everyone. Do you know what I mean? Like so.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, so you don't see anything different to what you'd see anyway, right? But it is different if I, for example, if I click on series, I see a previous series, but if I click on this line here, it's so weird. If I hover over the line, I feel like it should be the other way around. Does that make sense? I don't know if you agree with this. I feel like if I click, then it should do the highlighting. And if I hover, it should do what's going on here. Does that make sense? So
yeah.
It's so weird. I feel like
what's a lot better now is, as of 25.1, is the show data model on the sheet is so much better than this. Anyway.
Right. Yeah. Let's show people what they're here for. So let's go to sheet 1. If you're new to Tableau at all, I'm just down here in the bottom left. I always call this out because it's the one step I know in tutorials that, it's so easy to miss. Where you click on something like, wait, what did you even click on? Clicking on sheet 1, that takes us to this window. So this is the traditional Tableau view, right? Like this is the view that pretty much hasn't changed in 20 years of innovation. It still broadly looks the same. We see our tables here on the left-hand side. So I think I want to go back to something you said earlier on, which is at this point, because we've not built anything, the tables are still distinct tables. Our recipes are still on the kitchen table, waiting for us to sort of define what we're going to cook up, if that makes sense. So we see them as distinct
with the little
items.
exception, I think worth calling out
Ooh,
that as soon as you come here, Tableau joined those two tables together and union the tables together for sales and did book and info before you do anything, right? But all the other tables are sitting as independent tables and you tell them what to do.
Okay. And so if I just minimize all of these, so these are our tables. And so this is basically what you're saying. Book and info, that was actually a join. So we see them as one
logical
list,
table, if you will.
And then our sales data, we see them as one item, except for we also see
sheet.
Do we see a sheet? It's sheets in this specific case because it's coming from different sheets, but I guess this could be like different sources if you're using CSVs or something like that.
So if it's CSVs, it would say file names if it was sheets.
File names, exactly. That's the one. Yeah.
And then some databases can do it and some can't. But with flat files, it'd be sheet if it's Excel. It would be file names if it was CSVs.
Exactly. So that's quite a useful bit of metadata. The other thing I'll call out is actually when we right-click on this and we create an extract, what I did is I just came to this as a live connection. So in real terms, it's still connecting to the Excel file every time I do something. If I was to actually generate an extract, let's just do that here rather than the connection window. I assume you all know how to do it in both places. When I create that extract, we get this sort of little bit of a readout that says, look, okay, here's what's about to happen. And if I actually open this up, there is this one additional setting for how the data is going to be stored. So store data using one table for each logical table. And then there's this option here to store data using one table for each physical table. What I've never understood here is why does this toggle exist? Because I have both logical tables and physical tables in my data. So what is it actually going to do?
Yeah. So this is a little more complicated in that if you hadn't done any physical tables, that option wouldn't be available for you. So people should know first. So the only one that's going to go physical here is the one where you join books and info. Right. And what it's saying is, do you want Tableau to pre-join them and store them that way? Or do you want Tableau in Hyper to store them as individual ones? Right. So it's more or less based on disk versus trade up. But Tableau is still going to generate SQL like it's already pre-joined. So it's going to treat it like a physical table, whether it is or isn't. The reason why I say it's tricky, the only way to find out that I've been able to figure out if it's faster is to try it both ways, because you're trading off disk space for a bigger exploded table. Like in this case, your data is so small, it's not going to make a shred of difference. But it's how Hyper stores it. This goes back mostly to relationships to not explode your data on disk effectively. So I don't think about this much anymore. I used to be fair. I hope that's clear. It is a bit of because it's not exposed to you. Do you know what I mean?
Correct.
It's just the way
kind of
it's
hidden,
stored in Hyper.
Yeah. So this is good. And also this interface has changed. There used to be a slightly different window that actually had a little bit more visual. I'll try and see if I can put it up on screen, but I think it did a better job in the older version of explaining what was actually going on here.
This is the long journey of Tableau trying to get to complete parity on the web and the desktop, I think. Do you know what I mean? Like
the web window, where I think
that's
the filters
clearly an HTML window. You can tell by looking.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, so I thought I'd just touch on that. But anyway, if I all the other settings behave as normal, so filters, aggregation, number of rows, all of those. I think if you're familiar with this window. Okay, we'll just save it here and hit save. Bookshop data model, and now we've saved that as an extract. So in this particular case, our extract's pretty much good to go. And so just very quickly, just to sort of show this before I hand over to you, Kirk, to kind of really teach me what's going on here. If I was to grab some info, so let's just go grab a list of books. Let's go by title, because no one grabs their IDs, right? We all go by title. That's the thing we as humans know. And let's say I wanted to see how many editions there were. So in this particular instance, I think what I'd want to do is get the, is there an edition ID or is there not? So this is an interesting one. The book book ID, edition, format, ISBN.
The ISBN number would be the edition.
The ISBN would be great.
Like, so every edition gets its own
detail.
ISBN. There you go.
And then let's do count distinct, so we can see how many books. And there we go. So that's a very simple example of us building a very quick model using the data model. It's actually going across different tables. I believe the edition information was actually, I now come to think about it, it does have a direct relationship with the book table. So instead, let's just quickly build another one. Let's see if I can get the title, and let's see if we can get the number of publishers, because the publishers goes across edition.
Well, a quick thing, just because I obsess about performance.
Yeah.
Had you gone to edition, like to answer your last question, and pulled out the edition count at the bottom of that table, you should get the same answer without having to run that count distinct, which is a heavier calculation. So effectively, what that is on every table is a count row. So what Tableau is saying there is, grab me the title and then return for me the count of rows of every time you see it, which is a much lighter calculation than picture the CPU on a count distinct has to go, okay, I saw it once. Oh, wait, I'm back on that book. Like, it's a very heavy calculation. So again, on this tiny little data set, it's irrelevant, but on a big data set, that is so useful. Thing.
That's useful insight. So because you can tell I've got Tableau baked into me. I grabbed the editions, I put it on here on detail, then I did a count distinct. That little step is it's sort of muscle memory, right? But
if you had done a join, you would have had to, because you would have had a level of detail issue that you would have had to create that calculation.
Correct. So I'm still thinking in sort of old school mindset, because I guess I've never had a reason to change it, and it's always been correct the way I've done it, so why would I change? But actually that's a good call out. Actually, I'd never appreciated that, but now you mention it, it's like so obvious. So here we are again, title. This time I'm going to see how many publishers I have. So you're saying I can just get the publisher count, and this is going to be correct. So only one book has had 2 publishers. Can I be honest? Or maybe that's there's a story in that. So this is interesting. I find the data model quite liberating, because what it allows me to do is focus on what I'm trying to analyze, right? And I think you showed me your take on the same data model. So I've sort of built this the way that Tableau would suggest you build it. If I go back into the data source window, this is how I've built it for context. And I think we work through this in the order that is sort of scripted by Tableau, right? But I think I'm going to hand over to you to show a slightly different model that you've built. I think that would be quite interesting. Maybe we can discuss that a little bit.
Yeah, so here's my model. It obviously looks a little different than yours. I should say here that we don't have to throw Tableau under the bus, because although they said to build it the way you built it, that was pre multifact relationships, and they should probably update that page. But if I'm going to make this look like yours first, and then I'll build it back to here, but just super quickly, right? So you can also remove this way. So it's like Tableau with fields. I should be able to drag that off, right? And that'll work. Or I could remove it, either one, right? So I'm just going to remove it. And I think yours looked really similar to this. Again, you would book at the middle, but again, we could get that by going swap with base table. Oh, whoops, I didn't like it in this case. But effectively, you had your book here. Otherwise, it looked a lot like this, right? But you had your edition hung off book. Now, checkouts hung off book. One thing I should say about checkouts is I explained this data model more. I've never been able to wrap my head around someone who sells books and Author is a library. So I like to think of it like Amazon, right? So they sell books, and you can check out books on Audible or Kindle Unlimited or whatever way you want to think about it, right? So what Multifact allows us to do is to put in multiple base tables. So again, if I were to double click checkouts, and it's going to want to put it on book ID, right? So in this case, it didn't get it. It didn't get it the way I wanted to get it. What I want to do is I want to drag it out here to a base table. I should explain this concept. So the first interesting thing is, and you kind of showed this implicitly when you click through. But it's interesting, when books are sold, they're sold by an edition, right? So that's why we have to create a relationship. At runtime, it'll be a join to get to book. But checkouts, if we look at, like you did, it's books that get checked out. Like, in other words, on Audible or Kindle, they don't care what version of the book it is because you're only borrowing it anyway, right? So important to know your data. So what we do is we just go like this and we drag it on. And for a while, Tableau was going to call this shared dimensions, because these two tables share these dimensions, which you couldn't hang out here. So basically, I could also connect checkouts to addition if I could. I can't in this case, so I'll show you one I could. And now this graph is showing some really neat things. If we call this image our graph, it says that sales can answer, we can answer questions on anything in sales except checkouts because they're unrelated to each other, right? And if I look at checkouts, I can't answer questions on editions and publishers because it's literally impossible because it doesn't have edition information in the table. So this is where this highlighting graph works really well. And then the only thing I did, if anyone wants to follow along at home, so to speak, is I added to the link you're going to send, I just added a table with 365 rows. Let's hope 2193 is not a leap year. I don't know why for Dave it's 2190. It's not. It's always an even year. So because what we want to do is if we want to compare these, the one way we want to compare them is based on checkout date. And checkout or sales date based on date. So that the really great thing is these don't have to be at the same level of aggregation or same grain. So
I see.
When I drag dates out, I want the noodle, if you will. I want to connect either one of these to start, right? So I'm going to put dates there. This is the more complicated one. But when we come here, I've never understood why it doesn't always do that. Oh, because when the joins, that's fine. When that's broken. So we'll come here just to remind people that on checkouts that we have this weird, the data is aggregated. So imagine some third parties controlling this for us and they send us data at the end of the month, right? Whereas this table's every sale. So we would have to do, you already showed how to do a join calc. Here we just create a relationship calc. So what I want to do on this relationship is I want to do I always wrap these in dates because, I don't think I do for this one. So I'm going to do a make date we follow this out. The year is 2093. Again, we could always blow this out if people don't remember what they are. But the make date is year, month, day, right? So I'm going to put then checkout month, and I'm just going to put on the first of the month, right? Because we don't know the level of aggregation. We just know it's at the month. I'm just going to throw checkout month to a date, basically. And then on the other side, from my date field, I also have to do a calculation, which is, because I think some dates Tableau converts to a date time. So I just make sure by doing that.
Yes.
Right.
The transaction. Yeah.
And this is sales date, I think it's called, isn't it? What's it called? Date. Oh, no, sorry. It's date. It's my dates table. And then I need another. So basically I'm saying trunk it to the start of the date, or to the start of the month. And then I don't have to do that with this one, is what's kind of cool, is on this one, I can just go, and again, see, Tableau didn't know, even though they're both dates, because they don't have a different, they have a different name. One sales date and one's date. So that double click thing's not super smart, but that's okay. It has to match exactly. So
makes sense.
So now that we have this model, we can answer a lot of questions, right? So I always think about, data science, data analysis, you should always start with questions, but I'm more of an analyst than a data viz person, right? So I think a lot about, questions like how many books have we sold? So you started to show this a little, but let's start. It's because I had this an extra. Okay, that's fine. So how many books have we sold? I'm the exact same as you. People are going to grab title, right? Yeah. So if we grab our book title, this is the exact same thing you showed. One interesting thing right away is on a join, what we might have to do to know if that's one-to-one, you'll notice down here, I've got, that's got 58 marks, a little small, maybe we could highlight that. And then what we see, though, is we might do this, and try to figure out, how many
What's
or
going
count
on?
distinctive like you did. But
we
don't need to even do that here. What we do is we count the rows from the same table. We're going to see they're all unique, because if two books had the same name, it would show a 2 there because there'd be 2 rows of it.
I see.
Right? So it also works for that, right?
Okay.
Which I think is pretty slick.
That is pretty slick, yeah.
Yeah, but if we want to answer how many books have we sold, all we have to do, because remember, every sale is a row in the sales one, is we just bring this out. I could of course do it like you and get the bar, right? But the neat thing about this is if we sort it the other way, there's actually 2 books in our library that have never sold before, right? Okay. And Tableau will automatically take the nulls it gets on that join. It effectively did a left to right join. I guess it's a left join, right? But and then it says, well, I'm missing 2 records, so I'm just going to take those nulls and fill them with zeros. If we had done a join, we would have gotten 1 here because there would have been 1 row for them, if you know what I mean. Or 0 if we did an inner join. Or sorry, they wouldn't show up if we did an inner join, right?
Yeah.
So it's very powerful that that's why I always say, without sounding too slogan-y, but you get more answers with less data. And the reason there's less data is we haven't exploded any of these tables. Right. But I can control any answer depending on which field I bring into the view. Right. So that's kind of a simple example.
And it's really intuitive, actually.
Yeah. Like once you kind of wrap your head around it, right? So if we looked at, let's say we wanted to know our top selling books by genre and author. And one thing I should do is I should keep this view data model going the whole time. So this is kind of a new slick modal dialog box. I know you showed this off in your new features. But if you pick this, I can't pick it yet because I haven't pulled anything on, but watch as I pull them on, it'll show me some things, right? So what did I say? I want to know top selling books. So that's book title, right? And then I can go like this and you'll see Tableau's only pulling in from that table. And then if I want to know by genre, it comes from info. So I could say, by the way, I only got this one because when I pulled it off and pulled it back on, you get these kind of things. But if I do that, what happens? And then I can drag it here, right? I got my genre, then book, and then you'll see it as this. And then I want author name. So I could do something like this and just go create combined field, and now we got first and last name. Probably I've done that already, right? So just a quick, instead of writing a calculation, right? Although it's interesting, it didn't pull in. You see, it's a new feature. If I pulled in last name, and interesting, it didn't show up. Let's just do last name for simplicity, so the model works. So that's kind of neat. So what's going on here is that Tableau does an inner join across all these. If we get this window a little bit out of the way, it does an inner join on all these because it kind of makes sense. So at this point, if we have a book that say hasn't sold, or an author that doesn't have a book, or it'll only show us the intersection. But as we start bringing in, and that's because the heuristic, like I mentioned earlier, is if there's only dimensions, it's inner joins. Any measure, including the pre-calculated Tableau ones of the row count, Tableau will then outer join to it. So if we wanted to know on sales, remember we asked sales, so we just take the sales count. I didn't even create this calculation. It's just a count of, it's a count of rows. Otherwise, I would actually have to do item ID, order ID as a combined field in this data set. So it's slick that these are pre-built, right? So again, just to keep, if I go like that, again, you'll notice that in our data model now, the sales table came in, right, which is slick. And you'll notice that this book, The Deep Gray by Malowski, should be back here too. The Deep Gray didn't sell. See that modal changes too, which is slick, right? As you go sheet to sheet.
Flashed it out a bit more as well.
Yeah, so it even figures that out, right? So we could, again, search this way. You'll see people who didn't sell a book. But where this gets really powerful, and I don't think most people know this exists, is let's say I wanted to to answer, I've got it down here, but imagine here, all of a sudden I wanted to know, and I'm inquisitive like this, I know, as you are. If I randomly said all of a sudden, well, I wonder what authors we have who haven't sold a book. So when I had data modeling with Tableau published on Amazon, they put on my author profile like months ahead of the book, which I found weird because I was an author without a book. So it actually happened, right? If I take a measure from author table, remember author, whether there's author on here or not, there's last name on here. If I take author count and say throw it to detail, or I could throw it to text, it'll give me also all my authors who haven't had a book, and therefore, of course, they don't have a genre because they don't have a book, right?
Of course,
which is really slick, right? And of course, we could always edit that alias to blank, right? And same thing here. So that's really powerful because you would never, right? Hopefully, people wouldn't do full outer joins all over the place because the amount of nulls you would get would be crazy. So this way, there's no nulls on my data unless I force Tableau to ask for something where a null exists, which I think is really neat, right? So here are my authors. Randomly, I get to ask that question against that. So does that make sense so far?
That does, yeah.
Yeah, so it's kind of a neat heuristic. If we go back to our data model, just the last question, you'll notice this is pretty funny. You have to be on a sheet. I'll open that up again in a second. This is where multifact becomes so powerful because, again, like I said, I might want to answer, by customer, what are our sales volumes by relative to, how often they call our call center or something.
Right.
Like, it's tricky to do unless you do that. And this is why I love this bookstore model is I should be able to answer questions like, I wonder what our sales relative to checkouts are. Imagine if you're at Amazon, are we selling more books or are we, are people doing them on Audible, Kindle Unlimited, whatever we want to do. So what's neat about this, and it's a really powerful kind of query Tableau does now, is that's a really simple calc. So I probably already have it in here. So let me recreate this. So if we wanted to create a calculated field called sales to checkout ratio, what we could do is we could take the count of sales just like that. Then we could divide it by, the sum of our, because remember, we can't, on checkouts, we can't count rows because they're aggregated to the month level.
It's a different level.
So we actually want the number of checkouts. Right. Now,
I see.
The only trick about this is, so this is good, but this is what I meant earlier too when I said you don't need to know how to write SQL to use Tableau, but you should understand your data to use Tableau, right? Is if we bring this on, right, we get the average is 4.1, which tells us something, but I hung that date off. If I pulled date out now and I made date at the continuous month level, for example, there's a ratio over time.
Right.
But we can't come lower grain than this because remember, we only have, so you have to kind of know that.
Yes. but it will let you go down. Yeah.
But that number will be misleading now because again,
it's kind of pegged to the month level and it's just spreading out through the month. Yeah. Is that what it's doing when you do to the week?
We would have to look at that. We could look at a table and break it down. The challenge is, yes, it's good. What it's actually going to do, because it's a day trunk, is it's going to compare the week of sales to the month
to the
that
whole
it's in,
month of
because
sales.
we day trunk, right?
Yeah.
Because again, like we talked about earlier, Tableau for right or wrong, right? But philosophically, thinks you're smart. It's not their job to stop you from doing something like that.
Yeah.
Right.
I think a really useful feature we should tell Thomas this is when you make a sheet like this and there's a contextual like calculation or thing that you wrote back in the data model window, for it to show that here when you're building this, because that's sometimes you can be building this very removed from when you build the data model, and hiding and showing this relationship is I guess one part of that. But I think what you said there, I remember we're recording this. We did this roughly an hour and a half ago. And actually in that time I would have forgotten, but as an analyst that might have been last week or yesterday or 3 days ago. Now I'm sitting here going, why won't this view work? Oh, it's because we date
Right.
truncated the thing, right? So really nice to have a call out here that says, hey, let's do this. So Thomas, if you're watching, add it in.
That's one ad for sure. I will show you what they have done. Remember this when we come back here and highlight that. You'll see that edition and publisher are highlighted, right?
Yes.
But everything is here. If we come back and we said, well, I would like to break this down by edition or something, right? And I took edition and went, let's break it down by format or something. So I go to put format on color. What it does do is it does warn me here, right, that it can't break it down because, and if I had them on independently, it would say that because it's not related. So you have to be careful. It'll warn you here for sure.
When you hovered over it, it warns you there, right? Can you see if you hover over the checkouts?
It'll tell you up here too. It'll tell you everywhere.
Yeah.
It'll say the measure can't be broken down. Because one of them can't be broken down by format, right? And up here, it'll tell you it stitches together, which we should get back to how it stitches them together. So it will warn you about that. So I think it'll get better, right? The other thing I think we can expect to see in that little pop-up window is the fields that are causing whatever to happen, and hopefully maybe inner join, outer join, hopefully. So people even get to that. One thing I didn't show that you reminded me I should have showed is if you do notice, though, what they're also pretty smart about is if we said, let's just look at number of checkouts, you'll notice edition and publisher gray out.
Go gray out, yes.
Because it is no way to connect to them. So, but again, it's Tableau, so it's not going to stop me.
And it'll just give you the same
just
value
warn me,
each time.
But they are getting better at queuing than they used to be for sure. But you had a good point about when I bring that down, it should be smart enough to tell me, hey, I can't get to that level of grain on one of the two tables.
Because of this thing, you're right.
But what the last thing I should show is what's going on here. Then I think we've been through it all, which is awesome. If I took anything that is common between them, like say, since we kept going back to genre, if we took that on color, because maybe a product manager wanted to know, why would I be getting nulls? I'd have to think about that first. But if we shouldn't be getting it done, but we could think about anything. You could break it down by anything, right? You could break it down by the author's birthday if you wanted to, right? Or we could use hours writing per day. Anyway, I'll go back to that and we'll think about, because it always happens in a demo when I take
unusual things happen.
Genre. We look at why. It could be, that one genre never got checked out. But if we broke them down individually, it would show. But what Tableau is actually doing here to create these, but we'll see, for whatever reason, people don't like checking out mystery books, right? They like buying mystery books, and but nonfiction, I guess, makes sense. You know what I mean? I'm not going to go back to it or whatever. So kind of slick, right? That you can actually see these in the data, although it bounces up here. Again, too many colors there, but you get the idea. So
makes sense.
But what Tableau does here when there's two base tables is it aggregates to the level of both base tables. It brings in whatever dimensions you break it down by. Again, we could, of course, put that on a filter instead, right? So let's say we only want to see children's or something. What it does is it passes that to both, right? It brings back the aggregated results from each table, and then it stitches that together in the view. So it's really powerful because you effectively, to do that join in old school would be really difficult, because what I'd have to do, we'd somehow have to find a way to aggregate up that sales table first before we joined it to the other table, because you can't join tables like that at different levels of aggregation. So in this, it's not doing this. There's actually two completely independent SQL queries being run, and then in memory on this view, Tableau stitching the results together. So that's why these multi-fact relationships are so powerful. And, in the end, why we said before multi-fact, it didn't really matter what order these went in. Now I'm saying put these, and again, these would be the center of a star schema if if it was in other products that model star schemas. And then these would be what would be called shared or conformed dimensions, depending on what they were. So, but again, this model becomes really powerful because I can break down a word as an example by like almost anything here, right? Or pick it, you know what I mean? So I can say which awards had books checked out the most, or which award had sales, or what's the ratio between sales, and by award. I could have done that by award, right? So it's pretty powerful stuff when you know what Tableau's generating. And I would say, like so much about Tableau, it's like kind of quick and easy to understand it, but not intuitive unless someone tells you. So it's kind of a recurring theme, right?
You said something very quickly there. I just want to sort of double click on or drill down on, to borrow a Tableau term. You said it does it in memory. Is it fair to say then that the Tableau's data model is also a little bit kinder on your database, because it's not asking the database to do all this work? It's basically saying, hey, you summarize that table, send them to me, and I'll do the job of bringing them together, which in itself inherently means that the database isn't having to do both of those pieces of work. Is that a fair, like?
Yeah, it's a great point to bring up. And in the world of paying, I guess you technically always pay for queries, whether it's
Snowflake,
you're trading it off. You literally pay like Snowflake. Right?
It's one less query, I guess. It matters.
Yeah, but even against SQL Server, then people are
true,
right.
True,
so, but definitely in Snowflake, you're actually paying, or other products like that. If you extract this. Remember, Tableau's taking snapshots of each one of these tables. It's not doing any processing. And then at runtime, it's also doing all the joins, writing SQL against its own hyperdatabase. And at least today, Tableau Classic doesn't charge for compute. So talk about a good way to bring your
Sounds like
costs
you know
down.
Something's coming, Kirk.
No. Well, sorry. Tableau Next uses data cloud, and part of that charges for compute. That's all I meant. Sorry. But it's not, traditionally Tableau OG Classic, whatever we want to call it, core.
I see what you mean. Yeah, I thought you were about to
No, I don't know. I definitely don't know anything. Don't anyone read into that. It's just data cloud for stuff you move into data cloud charges.
Yeah. Right. That's what I understood as well. That's good. So
it's even going to be complex in Tableau Next, because if you make a zero copy reference, then it doesn't charge for compute. So that one's going to be. Exactly. We do a video on that in 3 months' time.
Oh God, yeah, that's another world. So this is like, there's a lot of depth. I mean, I'm gonna have to edit this video and figure out how long have we been going for. The point you'll be watching this as an audience, right? So there is a lot of depth to this, and this whole time, I think one of the things I've said to you, and I've said to Paul Eklund at Tableau as well, is that when you're building the data model, what we've done here is probably the equivalent of maybe 2 to 3 works of working on a problem, bringing your data sources in, iterating on it a little bit as you go back and forth within the business. And therefore, it's potentially unlikely that you'll ever build a model like this out of the gate. It's unlikely that you'll sit and build this sort of really complex, illustrious model out of the gate. Instead, what you need to do is come to this from a mindset of, let's say, long-term development, where you build this model, and the next time you get another question that can be answered by this model, you don't start again. You actually find this model and work on it, which then leads into this sort of world of composable data sources, where actually we need to decouple our published data sources from our workbooks and have them be sort of slightly more standalone assets with more thought through data models like this, or like other examples that you might build in your business. So we can actually do this iteration in real time, because otherwise you end up in a scenario where it makes no sense to do all this work in one model if every time you're going to start again.
Right. So yeah, the only 2 reasons, by the way, I even think composable data sources, I'm not as excited about, I think, as other people. No, I'm excited about. But it's because the only 2 use cases for them is if you have to use Tableau Prep, and then because this won't let you go grab a table out of Hyper, only the published data source, which is they could have fixed that another way. The only composable data source one is if you don't own the original data source and you
Correct.
can't edit it.
And you
right?
want to augment it with an Excel file or something like that, right?
But what's great about this is if you don't monkey with the performance options, right? Because that could affect this too. What's great about this is imagine we had not only this workbook, but this is a published data source, and we don't know there's like loads of workbooks potentially using it. Yeah. We can keep adding tables to this and it will not mess up those workbooks.
Correct.
Because this thing's always additive, like flexible that way, right? Whereas if we joined a table in, did the wrong kind of join, we could unintentionally like give wrong answers across the entire organization if that was in a published data model.
Right.
And the other thing about this is everyone's so hyped up about AI right now, and for good reason, right? But AI is really only a smarter or different way of doing what technology always did, which was let me simplify things. Yes. This to me would be like in the past, again, if I wasn't a data engineer, but I understood my data, I might literally draw something that looked like this on a piece of paper, yes. But I would have to hand it to a data engineer. Now what I do is I draw it on this canvas, literally canvas, and Tableau is effectively my data engineer for me, right?
Yeah.
Like, and so it's pretty, like, again, I can build this without knowing a lick about SQL, but again, have to know my data well, and Tableau handles all that for me.
Yeah, it's pretty powerful. It's a lot of obfuscation of complexity for good reasons, right? Like it allows you to just focus on the thing you're trying to answer. And I found this approach has also got me thinking more about not just the type of question I'm trying to answer, but I actually pay more attention to each of these tables. I think in the past, there was this sort of, let's say, desire to simplify your tables so that you could join them. So you could get the sweet sort of model or the sweet physical table, as we'd call it today, just to answer that specific problem. And you'd kind of deal with that task, you'd move on. This gets me thinking about each of these tables in their own respect. So I understand the book table as a standalone item, the author table, the award table. Right. And that builds a deeper intuitive understanding of your data model, because you inherently, a lot of the context we talked about, we knew we couldn't go from here to here without X. That is actually the job of a data analyst in some way or form, is, you know, being able to curate these data sources and knowing inherently what you can and can't do with them. So this approach is also more true to form of how we should all be working with data, not just as, you know, visualization or data analysts or data engineers, whatever you want to call yourself, just as stewards of good data. This is a much better way of thinking about your data and sort of building those through.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Like 100% on that. Because each one of these, like, I don't know if she worded it this way, but if I could channel like Bethany Lyons a little bit, right? She would say each one of these has analytical value on its own.
Correct.
Or in combination with any of the other things. They needn't be all brought together to have analytical value. Like I might just want to answer a question about how many books we have. And I don't have to run against a great big wide table to answer such a simple question, right? Like with your count distinct example.
Yeah. And I think maybe the last point here is I caught your conference session at San Diego Tableau conference, and I was in the session towards the very end, and you showed this incredible diagram of how optimized something like a data model can be versus the SQL sort of equivalent, right?
For fun, because you can tell what my life is when this is fun. I wanted to challenge myself to see if I could even build this model with join. So this is the exact model we're looking at. And I've had this question for years from people, actually, which is how many rows is too much for Tableau? And I'm like, that's not the right question to ask, because I've had a data model like 7 years ago on an old Mac at the time with 1.3 billion rows, and I was answering anything I wanted to in 2 seconds or less because it wasn't very wide, right? Yes. So I always tell people, think about it like almost like an Excel sheet where there's the number of cells on it. So it's the number of rows multiplied by the number of columns. So because each of these tables comes into Tableau in a relationship model independently, they're additive. You multiply them together and then you add up the results. So this thing has just under 400,000 cells. And then it took me a while to do this because I couldn't do it union, because remember our data, because checkouts, because sales don't have book IDs in them and checkouts don't have additions in them. So there's no way to union them to get them to go. So I had to do this model. And when you multiply all these together effectively, right, or you multiply your number of fields by number, number of rows you get with this mess, you get 29
million cells.
And the calculation's way more complicated to do, which I showed in the TC presentation. But even without that, it's basically this, right? It's like that data model's 1.3 times the size. And it can answer more questions because this has a lot of inner joins, taking things out of the data. Like this model doesn't know about those 7 authors that didn't sell a book. So this actually is less answers, even though it's literally 2 orders of magnitude bigger. Do you know what I mean? It's almost 100 times bigger, right? So,
I think that's a really profound point. That's why I wanted to call it out, because like if you don't care about anything else, I think this is probably the number one reason you should care about it, because like this is just being done for you. This is just like an optimization in the background, like for free, depending on what you build, right? And it's just right there for you. And I think another interesting thing I've just seen, I've just realized you went and took the screenshots of the little window that we looked at earlier to say 3 fields, 66 rows, and you've put this in there. This whole time I was about to ask you, how on earth did you get this little labels to say? It's that little screenshot from that
totally
section.
Took a screenshot to do it.
That should absolutely.
And these are all screenshots too, right? So.
Yeah. I'm thinking, Thomas, add the screenshot in. Come on, like this is actually really useful context, because I think it's a bit like building a flow in prep or Alteryx, whatever, right? Like you get to see what's happening at each step. And actually what would be interesting here is, as you click on the sales model, seeing that number change depending on which of the models you've selected, I think would also be quite useful, because you inherently, you'd essentially get 0. You'd get the number changing to show you the context of what Tableau would be processing. So it would make this model almost come to life in real terms.
Right.
I think that would be really quite cool. But anyway, we digress. Right, Kirk, we've been going for a long, long time. I think we have covered everything we could possibly want to cover, at least as of 25.1. Of course, what happens now is something comes out in 25.2, and we're like, oh, God damn it. Let's add an addendum. So what I will do is I will call out this. This is the first time I've ever done something like this, and I think this has been really great. If we have any additional notes that we want to add to this video, we will do so in the description and in the comments. The first pinned comment and in the description, we'll add any sort of additional notes. All the resources are also there, so you can also check them out. But I just wanted to call that out in case something changes, and it's just going to save us this effort of having to reshoot the whole thing. So really appreciate it. What did you learn today, Kirk? I was gonna ask you this, because obviously you were mostly teaching me, but I wondered, did you learn anything about the way I'm working or the way I'm thinking about this that's sort of different?
I think it's always good to learn people who use Tableau a lot, clearly an expert like yourself, think about it. Like I learn every time, and it's good to see that, because what it helps me do a lot is get better at explaining it, knowing, because lots of times the worst thing for me is in life is the curse of knowledge. It's so easy to think that people know what you know, and so it's always good to see. They're even little things, but they're little tips and tricks. I almost feel like it took 3 years, but I got to the point where I could almost do like a cool things to do in the Tableau data model. People don't know, right?
But you've built that, you've done that in public. That's why I think people come to you, because you've been in our feeds multiple times, and you still continue to, even after you've done multiple conference sessions and you're learning more, you're continuing to discover these things, and you are essentially going into a different depth of understanding almost on behalf of the community. And it's really valuable resource. This is why I wanted you on the channel, because I felt like I could try and do a video about this, but actually I think this discussion and us talking about it was a much more useful way of showing how to learn about this, because this is how you'd learn in an office, right?
Right.
You're working together, you'd come over my shoulder and you'd explain it to me. And this working knowledge is actually more useful than just reading the documentation or watching a tutorial from me where I step you through the functional steps, but actually the working understanding is completely different. So I think it's been a good format. So Kirk, what did you enjoy the most as well about this experience?
Yeah, well, I think I enjoyed the most about it is that I was flattered to do your first collaboration, but more than that, what I enjoyed the most is I was the first person other than you that got to say, let's get stuck in.
You know, I knew you'd love that moment. I should get that on a t-shirt or something. And
yeah, you should get Let's Stuck In.
I get like a limited edition run of Tableau t-shirts with Let's Get Stuck In on the back.
You should with Let's Get
Hold that thought. Hold that thought. I totally loved it. I you know, that phrase is it's a funny part of the brand, right? It's something I just started saying, and then I just realized, this has just become like a part of the thing, and it doesn't sound right without me doing it. Handing that over to you is like it's like an honor in many ways, because this is very much you sort of teaching the community and me. So in this case, it didn't feel right for me to say that. You're the one sort of taking us through this. So that's why I handed you the honors, and I think you'd enjoyed it as well. So which you did. So
definitely flattered. It's also it's extra fun because it's such a kind of British expression, which makes it even more fun.
It is. You do need the British stuff, like the thing. Yeah, what's the best sort of part of Britain to say that word? I think it has to be Scottish. The Scottish way of saying that would probably be the most truest form of that phrase. So I'll try and see if I can find an AI to say it in the appropriate way.
And with the last name of Munroe, you think I'd have a better Scottish accent.
I was going to say, that was a great chat. Well, thank you for joining me, Kirk. I think it's been fantastic. And you're the first person ever to collab on a video virtually. So I have a long editor ahead of me. But I think this is going to be a really special video. If you think the same, let us know in the comments. Once again, I encourage you to share this with your colleagues, share this in the community, and give us feedback in the comments below. Ask questions. We love to see those questions as well. This will be changing, but hopefully we've built a really useful resource that you can go away with, and you can say, I now understand how the data model works. I'm going to start using it.
Perfect.